John Barratt, and I'm going to give you the host there, John, so you can work your slides. So that's not it for a start. Bear with me a second. There we go. So, John, floor is yours, and thank you ever so much for taking part.
That's okay. Our host has come up now, so we'll just share the screen. So, welcome everyone. So the first session is going to really be giving you a baseline on what is Agile, and perhaps what is not Agile as well, which is sometimes easier to talk about. And we're just going to start with a little icebreaker. So building on what you've just said about how Agile is your organization, what I'd like you to do is, if you can, in the chat, so if any of you have got the chat open, just write what you've heard about Agile already. So the chat will probably be at the top, and then more, and then chat, and then you can write in there. How do you do Agile in very large organizations? Being able to respond quickly to change. Is Agile the right thing for you? Flexibility, responding to change, end-to-end accountability. Start small, working in sprints. A lot of myths around it, but it's about moving quick and responding, and takes a lot of discipline. Scrums. Is it a methodology or a way of life? Some nice questions there. So just hold them. And that's kind of the problem with Agile at the minute, is that we haven't really got a clear definition of what Agile is. It's kind of got very merged over the years, and kind of a bit cloudy. And you could ask 10 different people about what Agile is to them, and you'd get 10 different answers. And I'm going to give my definition and explain where I think we are with Agile right now, and where I see most organizations getting value from this word Agile. But I wanted to start with the why. So Agile came from the Agile Manifesto, which was almost 20 years old now. And it was organized by a person called Alistair Coburn. And the thing that he was trying to get away from was these large organizations, such as IBM at the time, come in with big processes, different types. RUP, for those old enough to remember, that was one, RUP, and there was some others, and saying that these just don't work. You can't take something off the shelf, put it into your organization, and expect that to give you value. So you can't expect to take something off the shelf. You can't buy Agile and implement it in your organization, expect it to just work. As someone said in the description, what we need to do is find out what works in our organization. Start small. It's about being adaptable and responding to change, and then growing it out based on the needs of your company. So what is Agile? So I've been lucky enough to speak to a number of Agile Manifesto authors over the years, and they all pretty much say the same thing, is that Agile is a mindset. And some of you might have heard that a few times and kind of rolled your eyes, because you don't just wake up one morning with some magical mindset. That's not how the world works. We actually have to start by having some process and tools and practices that maybe follow some of the Agile principles. So a principle is kind of a guide or a rule, which is outlined in the Agile Manifesto, which you can read at agilemanifesto.org at a later date. And by having some positive experiences with those practices, over time, our value system within us starts to change. So it's not like a magical thing where we get these new values and mindset overnight. Our values and mindset change over time based on positive or negative experiences of what happens to us, which means that we can have different mindsets in different environments. So in a work environment, I like to think that I have quite an Agile mindset. But for example, when it comes to the gym, then not so Agile. Don't tell me that I'm working hard, tell me that I'm looking good. Those sort of things. And so Agile is a mindset supported by the practices, principles, and values, and underpinned by a number of beliefs. So the beliefs are what make up your mindset. And just to finish the definition off, when multiple people in your organization have a similar mindset, then that's what makes up the culture of your organization. So multiple people of a similar mindset makes up your culture, whatever that may be. One thing to be mindful of that we see a lot in the industry is that Agile is not a methodology. So Agile's not a methodology. Someone asked that in the chat earlier. And what we mean by that is, and I tell this through a story. So some of you might be aware of Toyota having some very radical processes in the 1980s, and General Motors in America really struggling at the time. And so General Motors went over to Toyota to observe what the secret was. Toyota have been very open about how they work, invited them in. And one of the things General Motors noticed was this thing called an andon cord. The andon cord in the Toyota factory was a cord that would stop the entire manufacturing line. So if any person saw a problem with the line, they would pull the cord, a leader would run over, ask them how they could help, how they could support, fix the problem, and then they would start the production line again. So General Motors thought that was a great idea, went back over to America, implemented it, and guess how many times the andon cord got pulled in the first year? Any takers?
Not at all.
None.
I think it was actually once. And when it got pulled, yes, so when it got pulled for the first time, guess what happened? Do you think this nice manager came over or leader and said, how can I support you and what's the problem? What on earth are you stopping our production line for? Do you realize how much you've cost us? And so it never got pulled again because it was fear. And that's kind of what we see in this Agile ways of working. Quite often we see what we call a cargo cult. We'll implement Agile because that's what everyone else is doing. We'll go through the processes and the practices. Perhaps we'll implement a framework such as Scrum, but we won't embrace any actual cultural change. And when you do that, you will only get such a small % of the value of Agile that it's probably not been worth doing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these beliefs. And I've summed up 4 Agile beliefs. There probably is some more, and I'll invite you to think about what's in your belief system at the end in silence. So the first one, and the most important belief, is a customer belief. And the customer belief for us is all about putting the customer in the center of your organization. So prioritizing customers over profit, for example. And that's not because we're naive and we think that profit isn't important. We need profit to breathe as an organization. But if we don't focus on the customer and the customer needs, the profits will soon start to dwindle and go down. So the customer belief is a belief that delivering value to the end customer is the be all and end all of what we do at work. That everyone in the organization starts to believe that. I've linked them to some values and principles so you can see the link through the radar, but you'll have the slides after to read through that, so don't worry too much about that right now. We have the team belief. A belief that work is best carried out by small, self-managing teams working in short cycles and focused on delivering value to customer within 2 months. So what we mean by this is that a team has everything that they need in order to serve their purpose. So these are outcome-based teams. So if we're working on a project and we need someone from HR and finance, perhaps because it's to do with salary increases, then we would put them together in order to work on that rather than have them in separate departments for that time. Because we believe by putting people together, we get more value than keeping them separate. The key thing here is, and why HR is so important in all Agile changes, is because this requires a change in your bonus system, perhaps. So lots of organizations still have individual individual bonuses. And if we reward individual bonuses, then it's going to be very hard to encourage team behavior. So we need to be very mindful about what we are rewarding within our organizations if we want to be agile. And we've got the evolution belief, and this is probably my favorite. A belief that we should be continually looking to remove bureaucracy, waste, and reduce top-down hierarchies in order to operate as an interacting network of teams, all focused on working together to deliver relentless value to customers. And I was talking in my little breakout group about this, about the differences. I was saying that in my organization, we adapted from in-person training to online training within 1 week. And we're quite a small organization, and in their organization, they're still working out how to do that now because it has to go through so many lines of approvals. And so it's that continuous improvement belief that we're always looking on how we can do things better and how we can adapt. And one of the things that will help you adapt more is to have a network of people rather than a top-down hierarchy of people. Networks can adapt much quicker to change. So I just want you to spend, we're a bit strapped for time, but just 30 seconds thinking about those beliefs and also thinking about what other beliefs you think might be needed to be an agile organization. Just spend 30 seconds or so reflecting on that. I don't want you to talk about it to the group because I find it quite a personal thing. Just think about where you are with those beliefs. Okay. Oh, sorry, that's the shock, right? So we've talked about what Agile is, but then comes the real truth, which is Agile is not the goal. First thing I do when I go into an organization and they ask me, can you help us be Agile? Or perhaps they'll even ask, how can help us do Agile? The thing that I'm trying to find as quickly as possible is the why. Why do you want to be Agile? What problems is that going to help you solve? What are your organizational goals that you are not meeting in your current ways of working that have served you for the last 20, 30 years, perhaps? Because Agile is not something that will, in its own right, give you any value as an organization. What we need to know is what outcomes do you need, and will Agile principles, practices, and the mindset help you meet those outcomes or help you solve some particularly tricky problems you've got in your organization, such as how you adapt to things like coronavirus. So what we're expecting out the back of coronavirus is an increase in organizations who want to be agile because they've now seen the need for change, because one of these things could happen again. And now I'm going to just, for the last couple of minutes, go through a specific example for you to try and put it into practice. And this is a HR team that I was working with. It was a large change organization, nice company, about 500 people. This was with the senior business partner, and they were struggling with their employee experience. So employee experience was going down. And the thing that they were really worried about was actually that most people said, including members of the exec team, that nothing would change as a result of the scores. So it wasn't just that they thought that the scores were low, it was that people didn't think that anything would change as a result. And so when I got here, they'd already covered some areas to focus. not really important for this, but we took the top one. So the thing about Agile is we want to prioritize our backlog, and we want to take the top item and work on the top item. And this is a nice little recipe, I call it, whenever we're working on anything in an Agile way. So if you follow these steps, you're probably being Agile, whether you call it that or not. So we start with what clear outcomes and goals. So we go to cross-studio communication, exec visibility, lack of long-term vision. What will we see or hear if that increases next year? And so one of the results was a conversation around that people will expect more change next year. So the lowest score that they had that they really wanted to have an impact on was that only 12% thought that any change would happen off the back of the survey results. And if that increased, then they could assume that they've made some nice changes in the areas people cared about. So that was kind of a lagging indicator. They also were going to do some interim surveys. So we were going to measure things like exec visibility, how many times people had heard from the exec team in the next quarter, and things like that. So we looked at some outcomes and key results. We looked at the problem statements that we wanted to solve. And then we looked at one of the key things we need to do is who's going to influence or hinder these solutions. So who are the key players that are going to make an impact? And this was quite interesting because it wasn't just about exec team members, but what we found is there was some key influencers, perhaps like a senior developer who had a lot of say from a lot of other developers. So this wasn't to do with rank, it was to do with spheres of influence within your organization, which isn't necessarily the same thing. Then we prioritize those things, and then we solutionize with the right identified people and decide on what we call the experiments we're going to try. So what things are we going to try in order to get some clearer out to achieve our outcomes? And then we keep adapting on that process. And I guess we'll find out the overall results because they did it in August last year in a couple of months. But we've been measuring ever since on a small target scale, and we've seen some huge increases in those scores already. So we're expecting big results. And that's me over. So I just want you to think about what you've learned. So what does that mean to you? And now what can you do differently in your organization based on what you've learned? And thank you for your time.
Excellent, 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 excellent. Thank you very much, John. That's a lovely start, a really good start there. There's some really interesting points there about the problem statements. I'd like to come back to that. Perhaps can get some examples from you. Let's see what comes out in the Q&A later and the discussion.
Yep.
For now, if I may, let's hang over.